Mic check 1 2 1 2. Mic check 1 2 1 2. Hey, and welcome back. I'm going to go ahead and pause that and turn that off. Excuse me. But yes, welcome back. I'm Quincy Brewington, also known as the High Scholar. Thank y'all for coming back in and checking out HiiiSchool, where we're going to be talking about human motivation, theories of human motivation. Again, as I said, I'm your host. I want to go back over some things that we did with the first show. Like I said before, my name is Quincy Brewington. I currently hold a degree in educational psychology, specifically in applied cognition and development. That's a fancy way of saying I study how children and adults cognitively develop and develop over a lifetime. My main area or main population of focus is Black boys and men. So not only will I talk about theories of human motivation, but I also will probably more often speak very specifically to Black boys and men and what I've researched in that area, and that's what this channel will mainly focus on. So I'm not saying you won't get anything else out of this channel, but conversations of Black boys and Black men. But that's my area of focus, and that's my population that I probably focus on the most in our conversations. Some of the topics that you can look forward to. I'm already kind of building something as I go and improve. Some of the topics of associated motivation that may get your attention that I'll be talking about in the future, with things like goal setting and goal setting and achievement, the concept of self-regulation, attachment, attribution, and locus of control. Just some of the concepts you probably heard of before, been exposed to before, but I'll probably give it more detail and try to be more culturally literate and describing how they are specific to Black culture as well as specific to Black boys and Black men. So that's what I look forward to doing over the course of this channel. And I plan on doing some other things as well. That's just the lecture kind of parts. I will look forward to also giving some opinion based on the information and data that I have incurred, responding to current events. That's also going to be a part of this channel. So as I said before, be patient as I build this, but mainly what you're going to get from me is the knowledge base that I've come to acquire and come to really be interested in, which is the study of human motivation as it relates to Black boys and Black men. So some more quick housekeeping things. Thank you again for supporting this channel. It's always greatly appreciated supporting this channel. Getting things going is always a process, and I appreciate those who are with me in this process. And hopefully it'll be rewarding to you as you get more information related to motivation, not just in the daily or even long-term persistent sense, but really the nuts and bolts behind motivation, because from my belief, that's really what's going to give you more power in sustaining your motivation, is really knowing the ins and outs of motivation and how to, in understanding motivation, you can actually use the processes in that machinery much more effectively than depending on a motivational speaker or someone else. So that's really another purpose of this show. So while we're here, I was asked before, how can I ask questions? How can I engage with the show? If you're watching on YouTube, excuse me, there's a YouTube super chat there. Please ask questions in the super chat. I'll be watching the super chat to respond to those questions or respond to what's being engaged in the super chat. I'm a person that really loves questions. Taking on this YouTube thing has really been a task for me because I'm learning how to speak into the ethos or speak into the universe. There's no one right here watching me or engaging me, so your engagement is always welcome and appreciated. Okay, last thing I think I have on the housekeeping. If you want to support this channel in any way, of course, you're able to subscribe to this channel. It's right here on YouTube. You're able to give a thumbs up, like to the content as well. That's the way you can support this channel. And you also can support this channel through Cash App. My Cash App is Dr. QB, spelled out just like that, Dr. QB. All right, so we reviewed what this channel is all about. We had our housekeeping. Now I'm going to do what I do when I do what I do. we'll just talk about motivation. So let's go ahead and move over to our slideshow. I'm gonna, see less of me, more of the slideshow. All right. So I'm gonna give you guys a second if you want to sometimes, pull up the notes app on your phone or wherever you like to take a jot down a note or two. This is going to be more of a lecture today, going straight through, giving you guys some background and overview of the field of human motivation. What does it mean to us as educational psychologists, motivational theorists? When we're saying human motivation and what we're studying, what does that mean? Why do we study it? How long have we been studying it? And what are some of the traditions or ways we view motivation that not only has informed the study of it as far as in colleges and universities, but also how that's trickled into the general public? That's going to be some of the things I want to discuss today. All right. So let's move forward. All right. So motivational theorists really are very interested in what arouses and energizes behavior, what gets people moving, what makes people tick, whether it initiates or hinders their behavior. We're really interested in what gets your legs moving, your arms waving. We're really interested in trying to figure out how individuals get other individuals to move, how we can get groups to move. And our main concepts that we're going to have around that as motivational theorists are really going to be around arousal and attention, direction, and persistence. So when we're talking about arousal and attention, we're talking about really a basic psychological what sparks you. We in educational psychology even study what we call eye saccades, which is the eye movements that your eyes make. That indicates to us what is arousing and gaining your attention. Attention is the basic building block of motivation. So if you cannot attend to whatever goal or task that you're being given, you will 10 times out of 10 not be motivated to also complete that goal or task. So one of our main foundations in motivation theory is going to be around arousal and attention and how those things garnered and how those things divvied out. When it comes to direction, we speak in motivational theory about you can only be motivated if you're competent in a given direction or you're competent in a given goal or task completion. So motivation is not some of this kind of random juice or random sauce that individuals have. It's not something that you just kind of put on and take off. It's something that whenever you see someone, going towards a goal or explicitly making steps towards completing that goal, you know that you're seeing motivation because of that direction and or choice that the individual is making in order to complete that goal or task. Last and certainly not least, one of the most important parts of or foundational parts of motivation when we're looking at how people are motivated, we're looking at persistence of behavior. So early in our study of motivation, we were really interested in what gets people going, what makes people tick initially. But over time, the more and more we start to study motivation as psychologists, we start to move to looking at what can get you to maintain that energy over longer periods of time. What can get you to maintain that drive over longer periods of time? And it's one thing to energize and arouse, but it's another thing to be able to maintain that over 4 years, for example, when we talk about undergraduate or high school education. How can I get a high school student in ninth grade to maintain that same energy over the 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th grade year? Those are things that we're interested in as motivational theorists, because it's not just about getting you going, but keeping you going. I have a picture right here of Pepe Le Pew. In recent times, it seems like he's been quote unquote canceled. But if you remember Pepe Le Pew and his cohort, it's a great example of how arousal and attention when it comes to the smells they were giving off and how those smells would cue either disgust or cue engagement and wanting to be intimate in whatever ways they were choosing. That direction, there's always going to be, once you got that smell sparking that attention, next thing you know is going to be that kind of movement towards each individual, whether it be Pepe Le Pew and his cohort, I can't remember her name, and then that persistence of behavior. So throughout the entire engagement between the two, you see this kind of persistence, this drive or energy that's always going to be apparent whenever they're trying to engage one another. All right, let's move forward. So when we're looking at motivation as theorists, we're going to really be focusing on motivational processes. We're looking at motivation as just look at motivation as something that you just do, but there's these kind of mechanisms and pieces that have to be in place in order for you to be motivated. And we're trying to really break down what are those pieces, what are those mechanisms that need to be in place for you to be motivated or for motivation to appear. What may be undercutting your legs, what may be hindering motivation from appearing. And these are all things that are very important to us because when we're trying to motivate students in the classroom or soldiers in the military or employees at work, we want to be very in tune with what are we doing at work that when we get to this certain part in the process of doing the work, may be initiating or hindering the employees from doing that work. What may be initiating or hindering students from learning and doing the work in the classroom. And those things can be simple, can go back to those things as far as arousal and attention. They also can go to the direction or choice or the lack of persistence or expectation of persistence. So sometimes in our motivation situations, when you're expected to be persistent for a very long time, the students may be motivated at the beginning, but the motivation may fade over time. So this is why, as motivational theorists, we're really fascinated with the entire mechanism of your motivational process. We also understand that in this motivational process that there's going to be things you're going to be learning and picking up as you go on, and what you learn will be affecting your motivation. And we're going to speak a lot more about that later on. Motivation is also affected by these outside functions. So information processing is one of those functions that motivation is also going to be engaging with, as well as perception. So what you see and what captures your eyes, going back to that arousal and attention, and how you perceive those events, as well as your quality of memory. Are you able to move things from your short-term memory to your long-term memory are going to be very important in understanding what motivates individuals. So, for example, back to the classroom, students who have good short-term memory, oftentimes motivated in the classroom. They're motivated to start the warm-up, motivated to do the activities within the classroom. But if they have trouble moving from short-term memory to long-term memory, you'll see that motivation also taper off because they're having a difficult time retaining information and being persistent to go back and learn more information. So that's just another simple example of how something like memory is going to be influencing what we look at in motivation. So what does motivation affect? Why are we looking at motivation? Why are people so fascinated with it? Why is motivation really ripe for scammers? Because if I can give you the secret sauce or tell you there's a secret sauce and make you feel as if you're going to be motivated to complete your goal or task, then this is what I want to do to make a lot of money. It frustrates me as a motivational psychologist and theorist because oftentimes they're not going to necessarily give you they're not going to give you the nuts and bolts of what's behind motivation, what they may understand to motivate you. They're going to try to give you more of the bells and whistles with the speeches and truncated steps. So why is motivation so fascinating, and what does it affect? Why are people paying a lot of money to get motivational speakers to come in and direct their teams and students, etc.? Because individuals who are motivated are usually going to accomplish goals. It's going to direct their behavior. It's going to direct their steps. It's going to direct their ideas towards a particular goal. Even the idea of goal setting is an indicator that they're motivated. Individuals who are motivated and have that behavior directed in a certain direction are going to express more effort and energy towards those goals. These are some of the indicators that we're going to be looking for when we're dealing with motivation. It's more likely for those individuals to initiate and persist when trying to accomplish those goals. So when we're looking at motivation and individuals being motivated, what we're going to oftentimes see is that, go back to our example with students. Students who are motivated are going to sit down and do the warm-up or get home and do their homework much quicker than those who we see as lacking that motivation. Because of their motivation, and they're going to get started and keep going much longer than students who may be struggling. teachers and supervisors will see individuals who are struggling with motivation, and they usually have a hard time doing two things: starting and keeping going. I used to run way back when, cross country, and one thing we always talked about is how hard it is to start the run and how hard it is to stop thinking about stopping. Because once you start running, it's better to keep going than to stop and try to start again. Okay. Your brain works better whenever you're motivated. So you're actually going to be able to take in more information. You're going to be able to process things from short-term memory to long-term memory much quicker, much more effectively. And that's going to lead to improved performance overall. So the main goal of motivation when it comes to the speakers and other individuals who are coming into your space to motivate you is always going to be about improving your performance. How you do that will be the keys to whether that motivational speaker was effective. So they don't talk about directing behavior, how you can direct your energy and effort towards those goals, conversations about initiation or getting started and how to maintain yourself once you get started or sustain yourself. These are all very important when it comes to having a conversation about motivation. Okay. All right, so we're gonna switch gears here. We got to give it a quick lay of the land of why we study motivation, why people are interested in it as far as the effects motivation has on the individual. Really quickly, I'm going to go through really a history lesson of, really a quick history of how we've gotten to this place of studying motivation in this Western civilization. And that's why we start with the Greek philosophers. But I really want to give a quick history of the phases and traditions that we've gone through as educational psychologists and studying motivation. And this is a quick kind of timeline: Greek philosophers to the evolutionary theorists, behaviorism, learning theorists, cognitive theorists, social cognitive theorists, and the humanists. So let's start with our Greek theorists. Ancient society has always been fascinated with motivation. It's one of the earliest studies or interest into other human beings. It predates psychology. So motivation is one of those fields of studies that comes before us looking at the human mind and how those minds are formed and function. So Greek philosophers are mainly interested in this idea of motive. What are you trying to accomplish, and what is your kind of intrinsic internal motive? And they really summed it up through this idea of hedonism. So they understood the individuals were, in one hand, seeking pleasure, while also on the other hand trying to avoid pain. And they really kind of set this kind of dynamic or binary of individuals are purely trying to seek pleasure in the kind of hedonistic way, or trying to avoid pain, which oftentimes in ancient society would be being maimed or death. So alongside with that idea of motive and hedonism, start to emerge psychologically, especially with the emergence of psychology, this idea of dualism. So once dualism gets introduced, we start to delve less into these kind of carnal, body-oriented, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain motives, and start our conversation of the mind, the spirit, the psyche of the individual, actually having some say so in what moves their body, and what really gets them to exert energy in a way that shows that they're motivated. Last and certainly not least, I want to talk about also how instinct, and the introduction of natural instinct. So ancient cultures, not only the Greeks and Romans, but even outside of them, were very interested in animals and this idea of instinct and animals being pre-programmed with these kind of activities that they do in order to survive. Oftentimes these were, to the human eye, they would seem innocuous, but to everyone else, or to the animal, it is key to their survival. So the idea to help individuals understand this idea of instinct, we watch animals and see that they're motivated to complete these tasks, not only for their survival, but because they're pre-programmed to do this. They do this on a certain calendar at a certain time, and oftentimes is annually or every so often. So out of Greek and ancient society, we really get this introduction of this idea of motive. So we have a conversation that people are being pushed or pulled by this idea of pleasure and pain. We also start to delve into this connection between the body and the mind, or the body and the soul. So these kind of body purpose versus the soul purpose, and how maybe a soul purpose can propel individuals in a way that maybe body can't, as well as this introduction of instincts. And we'll talk more about instincts when we start talking about the components of motivation and human motivation theory. So continuing on, and this also follows the tradition that psychology starts to develop over time. So we're talking about evolutionary theorists. We're talking about the Darwins of the world. These people who are going out and trying to investigate how animals are changing over time, and how this concept of natural selection is taking place. What early psychology contributes to motivation theory is not only are we focused on human behavior, but human behavior in connection and engagement with their environment. So prior to this time period, when we're talking about the ancient society, especially with the Greeks and Romans, they're only looking at individuals and their movements. They're not factoring in where you are, what the weather is like, what the conditions are like in the space that you're in will also have an effect on your motivation. So our earliest psychologists do not understand that cold room will affect how your body moves when trying to complete a physical task. Something as simple as changing the temperature of a room, or even too hot, can affect how motivated or unmotivated an individual may be. When behaviorism is introduced into psychology, we start to look. They were really focused on not only behaviors, but manipulating behaviors, and they had a pure emphasis on drive. So behaviorist theorists of motivation are always trying to see what not only initiates you, but kind of gets you locked in and zoned in on a particular goal, given your choice. And oftentimes behaviorists were trying to limit those choices to direct your drive. And that's the best way to describe it at this time. By limiting your choice to direct your drive, I'm in essence manipulating your drive to whatever the goal is. And for many behaviorists, the goal was for the scientist or the researcher. Behaviorism was a time period in psychology where you saw a lot of experiments where individuals were manipulating or setting situations where you have a certain instinct, but I'm going to create variables that you now are going to possibly respond differently than you naturally would given your instinct. And that was what kind of describes the drive in behaviorism. In addition to that, we have these ethologists. Again, we're studying animal behaviors and understanding that how we understand animals and their innate, or not only innate, but instinctual behaviors. We now are trying to learn how to modify those innate responses. So similar to our behaviorists, we started this idea of modifying and manipulating instincts and innate responses with our animal community before we started to try it with human beings. Luckily, we live in a society now, hopefully, that understands that behaviorism and those experiments are very dangerous, because as much as you can direct the drive of an individual, once that experiment is over, there's not a lot of maintenance that the individual can do necessarily to correct what this modification of their innate responses. So, and you see that with ethologists as well. When you have animals who are taken out of their natural habitat, their innate responses are modified, and then when you try to reintroduce them, they have many difficulties because they don't necessarily have the same orientation to their environment to motivate them to do the same activities. So as you can see, early psychology and early motivation theory is really setting this kind of foundation of why are humans moving the way they move, why do they do what they do, and what is influencing that. We are already starting to think about, is there something internal in the individuals that may be pushing them or pulling them in different directions, or is it something external that may be pushing or pulling them in certain directions? Is there something that we also can do to initiate or hinder that movement or that movement? So Pavlov experiment, if you remember Pavlov experiment with the dog, is a great example of using animals to understand behavior and understand motivation. And I like this political cartoon just because it gives an opportunity to discuss who's really motivated here. Is it the dog being motivated by the food or the bowl being presented, or is Pavlov the person being motivated to do this experiment because of what he understands about what he's trying to understand about dog behavior? We'll take a quick pause to check our super chat. Okay, we don't have any questions quite yet, but we're going to keep on moving. I also look in the comments after the video is posted to see if we have any questions related to the motivation. Again, we're trying to build this as we go. So in building this, we're going to figure out what's the best way to present this information and get this through to you. But again, I love your engagement, love your questions, and we'll answer them as they come. So next, after we have our behaviorist, ethologist present this kind of foundation in psychology of looking at individuals and what pushes them, pulls them, as well as how that can be modified or manipulated, we start to get to these learning theorists in psychology who not only were we trying to manipulate and orient some of these behaviors, but we are trying to understand how they've learned these processes before. So this idea of from learning theorists, they have the idea is that you are learning your environment. Your environment is orienting you for motivation and for psychology even. So your direction is really a product of what's been reinforced through rewards and consequences. What's been reinforced to set your foundation and orientation for motivation. To get individuals to persist, in other words, to maintain and sustain their motivation, we're going to have to schedule reinforcement. So when are we going to schedule rewards for you to maintain your motivation over longer periods of time? And that's what learning theorists really start to contribute to this idea of motivation theory, where we understand that, yes, there's going to be some things that are going to be innate and instinctual, but also going to be some things that we learned over time. If you ever had a toddler or small children, you start learning very quickly that when rewards, snacks, chips, cookies, cakes, whenever those things are presented, they actually initiate and or hinder the direction in which the individual will move. If you want to persist, as you get older and you want those activities that children are doing to persist, whether it be washing dishes or taking out trash, you're going to have to figure out a schedule of when those rewards or consequences will be presented. Because one thing I'll tell you as a psychologist is when rewards or consequences are presented, they have one or two effects on behavior. They either sustain behavior, maintain behavior, or they start to have this kind of fading effect. And the longer and more often reinforcement is presented, especially when you think about it in terms of persistence, that fading is going to happen more often. So giving a better example, in a classroom, when I give candy on the first day, it's actually going to be a great initiator of motivation. If I give candy every day, by day 45, I'm going to see the candy is no longer effective in maintaining my students' motivation because of that schedule being too routine. However, if I start on the first day and that first week I give candy every day, but after that first week I start to give candy more sporadically, you're going to see that motivation maintain itself more often than not because that schedule is more randomized. But that's what learning theorists figured out. One drawback to learning theorists is you as an individual, going back to what our Greek philosophers figured out with dualism, they didn't consider your mind. They didn't consider how you understood the world at all. So to the learning theorists, your cognition, how your mind works and understands information and processes information was not important. Only what you've learned and what's being presented to you, how those rewards and consequences were scheduled. Those are the only things that are going to really affect your motivation. So when you lack motivation, it was to the fault of the reinforcement, more so than individuals maybe interpreting things differently. So some of the language, reason why I go back to Pavlov here is learning theorists. Pavlov's experiment is a classical learning theorist experiment. It builds on behaviorism, but it's a classical learning theorist experiment. And you see certain terminology and concepts like classical conditioning, those unconditional response and conditional response. This is all kind of language around theorists. And as you see, even if you remember the experiment, it wasn't just about understanding the food stimulus to the response from the dog, but also how a learning theorist can reinforce and schedule that reinforcement to motivate the dog to salivate or not salivate. All right. So now that we've gotten from ancient society and their behaviorism, hedonism, we move forward to behaviorists who are trying to modify and manipulate behaviors to understand motivation. We've also gone through our learning theorists who are trying to use the schedule of reinforcement and rewards and consequences as a means to motivate. And we get closer to our more modern understandings of motivation, which are going to be cognitive, social cognitive, and humanistic. Social cognitive theories are going to really focus in on how individuals sees what happens, how they internalizing the events, the information. Internalization is paramount in cognitive and social cognitive theory. So how you take in and think about and store information will be all the indicators we need, according to cognitive theorists, of what's motivating you, what's pushing your buttons, what's making you tick. So I put 3 images here because in these 3 images, there's pretty good examples, simple examples, but pretty good examples of how cognition and how cognitive theories really understand their role in psychology as well as motivation specifically. So the first image of the soda cans, I say soda, but I've heard in some other places it's discussed as pop. I don't use pop. I'm a Southern man myself. But even as a Southern man, I'm from a state where Pepsi is the main soda. Pepsi is the dominant soda. So I've been told to hand me a Pepsi, and it can be any of these sodas that you see here. I also live in a state now where Coca-Cola is going to be the main of choice, the main drink of choice. So whether someone says, "Hey, reach that cooler, hand me a Coke," now that may mean hand me a soda of any type, or it could possibly mean Coca-Cola specifically. How individuals have internalized that information about sodas, whether it be through their regional and geographic location, or just their own labeling system, their own interpretation, that's going to be what we get as far as the behaviors responding to the question of hand me a soda, hand me a Coke, hand me a Pepsi, hand me a pop. Even saying hand me a pop sounded weird to me. Going to the next image below that, what you see here, if you invite a person like me, a Southern man like me, to a barbecue, I don't expect to see what you see here. So this is a cookout. I see like hot dogs, chicken, burgers. We have July 4th coming up, so this is something that people are getting ready for. That's a cookout. I expect that for a cookout. When you say you're going to do a barbecue, I expect pork shoulders, whole hog, maybe some ribs. You're going to be smoking things for hours. You probably had to do this before I even arrive. I'm going to be very upset. If you tell me you're having a barbecue and I show up in this hot dogs and hamburgers and chicken on the grill. But that's another example of how individuals, because of their culture, region, etc., will take in information, interpret and label that information, and their behavior, their motives, and the drive, energy is going to be a result of how they've interpreted that information. A more nuanced example and a better example that will kind of hit closer to home for some people. Those first two were more fun, but any grading system is always going to be determined based on how individuals are labeling those grades. I saw it as a classroom teacher, but you also see it with food service grading, food service health grading, where if you walk into a restaurant, if I see an 86 and you see an 86, how we interpret what the 86 means is going to be very different. So I can go into the restaurant with one person and they say, oh, 86, this restaurant's dirty. This restaurant's filthy. And then myself may go into the restaurant and say, well, this restaurant looks, 86 is a passing grade. The 86 is a passing health grade. How we interpret those grades will always be important in motivating our behavior. In a classroom sense, when I gave out classroom grades A, B, C, D, and F, I started to learn and understand that how students understood their self and the classroom environment and their groups, that's what determined how they understood the grade they got. Sometimes I heard, hearing a student celebrate a C, there's nothing wrong with C's, but celebrate a C as if it were an A. How they interpret that C is very different than how I, as a teacher, may be interpreting the C. They may be interpreting it as a validation of their friend group, a validation of what they know compared to what they've known before. These are all different things I had to take in consideration as a classroom teacher when I'm, hey, here's a C, you can do better. I can do better depending on how I've interpreted it or labeled this C. This C may be the goal that I set for myself, and I'm accomplishing that goal. So think about grading systems when you think about cognitive theories, because oftentimes how those grades are interpreted are going to be indicative of how the behaviors that you see thereafter. So that C student is going to work the same pace and work at the same tilt as they did before to maintain that C. That C was exactly what they worked for. All right, so moving on to our social cognitive theorists. We have some social cognitive theorists who are building on what our cognition theorists have put out there. One of our biggest social cognitive theorists is Albert Bandura. He's out at Stanford University. And he presents this very simple equation that to many of us is simple. Like I said, it's simple. It seems to make sense. However, Greek philosophers, our behaviorists, our learned theorists, and our cognitive theorists did not necessarily package it all together like this. And basically what you see here is that the person that we all see and engage with is a product of the behaviors and the environment that they will exist in. The person that you will see and the decisions they make and how they understand the world will be a product of the behaviors and the environment in which they engage. So according to Albert Bandura, we can never have a conversation of who this person is, how they're motivated, how they are hindered from motivation, without having a conversation of behaviors in the space of not only the individual, but other individuals, as well as the environment that they are existing in. Some of the best research that Bandura did about social cognitive theory was all around sport and around how individuals understood their proficiency in sports, the environmental factors in their proficiency in sports, and how that would influence their performance. So if you thought you were good at basketball and you were in a gym with other people who appeared to be pretty good at basketball, your performance may be better than if you're in a gym and you don't feel like you're really good at basketball, but you fare pretty well. But now you're in the gym with a bunch of people that suck, who are not really good at basketball. That's going to affect your how you perform, according to Bandura. So social cognitive theorists really start to become more grand in understanding that these individuals are not, on an island by themselves to be motivated. They're engaging with the entire world at the same time to sustain their motivation. Okay. And the most recent approaches to motivation now I consider myself a more humanistic thinker when it comes to motivation. It's going to be about the entire organism. So similar to social cognition, you like to think of these as building blocks. All these traditions and approaches really borrow from one another and try to advance what the prior one did. Humanistic is going to build on social cognition and understand that, yes, the person is a product of those behaviors and the environment, but we need to start to think of some universal truths around motivation and psychology that we can apply internationally. And that's why it's a more organismic approach. It's dialectical. In other words, the behaviors of the individual are going to speak to the environment and to the person and their cognition. They're all going to be talking back and forth. And we expect that conversation. We expect these things to really affect one another in almost a cyclical way. It's a big circle affecting one individual that we must consider. But one of the main tenets of a more humanistic approach is that all humans are motivated. Prior to this approach, you will have conversations that would lend themselves to say, well, there are some people who are unmotivated. That's not what humanistic approaches are going to do. They're going to generally approach it as if all humans are motivated. We need to figure out what may be undermining their motivation, what may be cutting their legs out from under them, what's going on either with the individual, with the environment, with the behaviors in the space that may be undermining that. So having a humanistic approach to motivation for myself, it frees me up from trying to figure out, is this a person who is not motivated altogether, or this is a person who exceeds in motivation. When I understand all humans are motivated, I now can go in and use these other traditions to understand what may be going on that may be undermining or even initiating their motivation. Some people are very motivated and just don't know how they got there. So humanistic approaches are actually helping us understand, with everybody being motivated, everybody being engaging in the world in some type of motivated fashion, what may be initiating that motivation, undermining motivation? What are people doing to sustain and maintain motivation? Are there some bigger theories we can start to think of that can really encompass what motivation is? So the prior theories that you'll find if you go into motivation, I mentioned some of them earlier in the video, like attribution, like achievement. Those theories are going to be very individualized. They're not going to take into consideration the environment. More humanistic approaches are going to make sure that we talk about the environment, talk about the individual, how the individual perceiving that environment, what are the messages, what are the actions and resources in that environment. These all are things that are going to be important in understanding why or why not this person is motivated. Okay, so just to give a quick overview, and I've said some of these things already, early theories, they don't really give a whole lot of individual difference. They really were bland in imagining each individual as the same motivated person. And this is something that psychology, any science really fell victim to, and motivation was no different. So in the earliest versions of this, with our behaviorists and our learned psychologists, even a bit into our cognitive theories, individual difference is not accounted for. So you're no different than others. And it was rife for problems as a result of that. So the reason why we use more social cognitive, humanistic approaches now is that now we can account for individual differences. I don't live in the same neighborhood or a city as someone who may be in Carson, California, for example. However, if you don't factor in those spaces and trying to grade our motivation, you're not going to understand what's propelling or moving either one of us. Okay. Okay. Last point, like I said before, with humanistic approaches, we're now trying to see how these motivational processes, which become systems, are activated or hindered or squelched. So with more social cognitive humanistic approaches, we're trying to really gauge, you have a motivational system that's initiated and activated this way versus these other systems. That's something that we're more fascinated with now in motivation, more so than really rigid and static. Are you motivated? Are you not motivated? Okay. going to pause for a second. Give myself a chance to catch my breath, as well as look and see if we have any questions in the chat. A little midday coffee. Well, for my people on the West Coast, a little morning coffee. It's quite hot down here, very humid. All right. So we don't go over an hour. I don't want these to be too long, but I want to set this foundation so that when I get into some more modern topics, sometimes testy, controversial topics, we'll have this foundation to go back to. All right, let's go ahead and finish up strong. All right, so lastly, what I'm going to go over is the components of motivation, kind of these pieces of motivation, the mechanisms that we're going to be looking at. Some of this will be reviewed from what we said before because of the theorists, but this is kind of the first nuts and bolts. So whenever we're looking at motivation as theorists, when we're looking at motivation as psychologists, these are the components that we're going to start off breaking down into before we start going into our own theories or traditions, philosophies of motivation. All right, so there are going to be three basic components of motivation. These three basic components or mechanisms are going to be biological, learned, and cognitive. Okay, these are going to be the main three that we're going to springboard into our other theories from discussing. So let's go ahead and start off with our biological component. As we discussed before with behaviorism and even our ancient societies, there became an understanding that there's something in our genetics, there's something in our DNA that is going to be programmed in, that's going to move our behavior. We're no different than many other animals. So whenever we were studying the animal kingdom, I don't know when that hot moment was, but we eventually said, you know what? I'm an animal. And because I'm an animal, I must also have the genetic structure that's telling me to rest, that's telling me to walk, that's telling me to drink at these different times. And I need to understand with those biological components that they're going to sometimes supersede or go over my own cognitive or learned components. Some of these are immutable. They can't be changed. They can't be manipulated. They are just a part of being human. And that's what the biological component is oftentimes going to focus in on. When we talk about our open programs versus our closed programs, that's really what I was speaking of before when I talk about our closed programs or these programs or these commands within our biological structure that we cannot change. As much as we would like to change or manipulate these programs, these are very difficult to change. Like hunger, thirst are very closed programs. And I say that only because not that you can't change the schedule of when you eat or when you will drink, but you will do that. If eating or drinking is not taking place, I will tell you motivation will be undermined. That's a quick way to undermine motivation. Having any of these biological components ever not being addressed, whether it be eating, drinking, going to the restroom, heat or cold, these are all things that are going to undermine individuals motivated in your space. We also have open programs. These can be manipulated a bit, even more so than our closed programs. These are actually ripe to be manipulated. So learning language is going to be one of those open programs where you have these genetic structures that are kind of sitting there waiting to learn language when you're about 1.5, 2 years old. If they get tickled very well, you'll pick up language and start to learn versus closed programs. You don't have that kind of ability. They don't have that component of or that part of adding to the programming that when you're dealing with open programs, you have this preset DNA that's going to be affected by the environment. So it's really interesting that biological components still have this kind of open programming that can be affected by environment. However, they are right beside those closed programs that are going to be already coded in and run similar to your computer. Okay. We learned about this biological component mainly through ethologists, going back to that kind of study of animals. And what they like to coin it as a pattern of stimulation. What they mean by that is A great example of that, going back to open and closed programs, would be potty training. So ethologist understand that potty training a young child is an open program. It's an open program that oftentimes when you first get your child, you think it's a closed one, but open program in the sense of over time, you're going to transition them from pottying in their pamper or diaper to creating a pattern stimulation where they go to the potty, whether that be a portable pot. Then we're going to move up to the commode. So in that pattern of stimulation, we're really kind of, the biological component still stays the same of you need to go to the restroom. You need to go to the bathroom. You have to pee or poo. However, where that takes place is a part of that open program and how you function that. This still teaches on reinforcement, but we're not quite into reinforcement. But that pattern of stimulation, you start to learn, when do I have to pee or poo? Is it after I eat? Before I eat? Is it, what are the normal times? So what you're trying to do with your toddler is teach them there's usually some normal times when you have to go to the restroom. It's usually before or after you eat. Usually before or after you have to go somewhere. These are all things you wanted to make sure you align for a small child so they understand how to work through these biological genetic functions that they have. A lot of early child rearing and raising is you helping them understand these biological components that are going to move their behavior, move their body. And it's just a major part of it. Okay. Also part of this biological system, motivational theorists really focus in on the brain. The brain is the key to motivation, especially when you start getting into the cognitive and social cognitive traditions, because how you're interpreting information is important. But we can't forget that the brain has a physical function. It has certain parts of the brain that are going to perform certain functions that are still going to be connected to motivation. So we talk about our limbic system. Our limbic system is going to be our emotional expression, and this is going to be all throughout our body. It's housed in the brain, but that emotional expression as far as how your body responds to the outside world, the stressors of the outside world. So again, going back to the cold or hot of a classroom or a workspace, your limbic system is going to provide emotional responses to what the outside world and the environment is providing. We talk a lot about emotions and motivation because emotions and that perception are going to be initiators or hindrances to motivating individuals. Okay. One of the examples I give there is talk about modeling. Modeling is so effective because of the emotional attachment or emotional engagement the individual has with a role model. Okay. We have to also talk about the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is probably the component of the brain or part of the brain that does the most kind of motivation stuff. The things that motivation really starts at in the biological component, which is satisfying hunger, thirst, satisfying, the sex and temperature control. Okay. So the hypothalamus is kind of this it's one of our biological drivers, if you will. And it does a great job right here of talking about the kind of main motivational, biological motivation issues or concepts. So when we talk about biological motivation, biological components of motivation, oftentimes what will come up is, are these people being fed? Are they going to be getting something to drink? You can't always satisfy the sex, but temperature control. These are environmental factors that are going to affect whether an individual wants to get started towards a goal or not. Okay. Okay. I don't want to go too deep into this. Give you opportunity to look at this, but going back again, there's a chemical and chemistry element to arousal and attention, as well as emotions that also play a major factor in biological components of motivation. If you know anything about dopamine, you understand that anything that gives you that kind of high or that kind of feeling is going to pull you to that, whether that be speaking in front of people, which I'm pretty sure everybody loves, It could be anything. So, one thing biological components I have to always kind of factor in is that not only do we have these kind of cognitive things going on, but your body's responding in a very real physical sense. And those chemicals and those substances that are created, and that feeling that's created as a result of it need to be factored into whether it is initiating or hindering your motivation. Okay? So even in behaviors, we start having this, people start to speak up and say, whoa, 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 the outside world is also having an effect on this. So how are we not talking about it? So you see the interactions position there, and that's how we're going to move forward. So as we talked about before, when you move from biological to learn, you have these rewards mechanisms. They're going to be very important. One thing about learned components versus biological components, in learned components, these behaviors can be frequently redirected. So the reason why I talk a lot about classrooms when it comes to learning components, because oftentimes in classrooms from year to year, teacher to teacher, you have these certain behaviors that one teacher may expect in one classroom that the next year it's completely different expectations of behaviors. However, because these are part of the learned component, they can be redirected at any time. Okay, they can be. You've had classrooms. I'm not focused on the bathroom today, but going back to pool and pottying, you have certain classrooms where you can go to the restroom as soon as you raise your hand. And then you have certain classrooms where you're going to be given 4 or 5 passes for the entire semester. You use them wisely. How is a student able to navigate those two spaces effectively? With the learn component of motivation, because the number of times they go to the restroom can be redirected time after time, especially after potty training. Okay. Learning components are going to stick strong to those principles of reinforcement, and understand that there's going to be a reward and consequence that needs to be presented to individuals in order for them to be motivated, whether to initiate it or to maintain it. The lack thereof is going to be what hinders individuals from being motivated. So not presenting rewards, not presenting an effective reinforcement schedule are going to be the reasons why those in the learn component of motivation will be struggling. Okay. And like I said, I'm not going to rehash some of this. Some of this stuff I've kind of already gone over as far as reinforcement, classical conditioning, and stimulus response. One thing we cannot overstate and overlook with the learn component is that it's essential to orient the learn component so the individuals can do it themselves going forward. So individuals, I believe, and many other psychologists believe, individuals need to learn how to reinforce for themselves. They oftentimes do. It's just how that takes place that's going to be important to understand. So how an individual understands the stimulus, and how this individual understands the appropriate response is going to be critical in whether they maintain motivation or not. Okay. And last but not least, the cognitive component of motivation has everything to do with knowing, and this idea of how you know what you know. How you determine what you know is a process of you internalizing information, as I said before. When you internalize information, you have your own interpretations, your own labels, your own classifications. So you put in your own mental box. We don't know what box you put it in. You put it in that box. How you orient it, or how you put the information in that box, and how you pull that information back out of that box will all be up to you, and all has to be understood by us in order to motivate you. So, as I said before about classroom grades, I've had students who get A's and B's and be very frustrated and not understand why. I had students get C's and D's and F's and be very excited and not understand why. And it really all goes back into how they're taking those grades in that grading system. How do they understand it and what they know, and label it themselves? And how is that then going to respond and have them affect their behavior going forward? So with my A and B students, sometimes I have to kind of, settle them down. Like, there's nothing more you can do to do better. This information is very difficult. With my C and D students, sometimes I have to go the opposite direction. Like, how can I motivate you to do better? Because how you're already interpreting the C's, D's, and hopefully not the F, but the C and D, you seem to be very excited about it. I want to celebrate with you, but we know on the scale of grades that we need some improvement. So It's very interesting that with cognitive components of motivation, it's all going to be about how this is where we get the most individual difference, because we can't account for how you internalize the information. We can't account for how you understand and how you're going to behave thereafter. We're only going to see the outcomes of it. And that's something that's critical to say about motivation. As I do this show, I'll probably say it over and over again. I'm pretty sure I'll say it even again in this slideshow that motivation is a state the individuals are in, and that state is created by how they understand the world, how they see the world, and how they are being triggered by the world along the way. All right. So we're going to be doing we're wrapping up as we go. So some of our current issues when we study human motivation and how individuals are motivated or lack thereof. We have a conversation of state versus trait that continues to pop up and pop his rears his head up over and over again. When we're talking about state, we're talking about these kind of conditional coming and going of behaviors versus a trait, which is static. It's always going to be on an individual. Our earliest theories of motivation did a really good job of saying that it was a trait, that either you're motivated or unmotivated. This is where a lot of motivational speakers get their money. But as a humanistic theorist, I understand that no, motivation is a state. We all can jump in this kind of motivated state if given the right context, given the right information and knowledge, and given the right resources. Now, when we can't get that, is usually because of all those things as well. Not having adequate resources, not having adequate reinforcement, and not having adequate understanding of the issues or of the goal. Whenever individuals have really married themselves to the trait argument, it's been because they want to say some people lack motivation. Just keeping it 100. Anytime you have a trait versus state argument and people are holding tight to this innate trait that you're born with to be motivated or not motivated, they usually try to hold on to it because they want to say these other people over here are not motivated. And that's a very dangerous conversation as a psychologist. Okay. We're still trying to understand the environmental stimuli as a source of arousal. So that's one, as I said before earlier, the most fascinating areas, because we still have yet to understand the initial where it starts. Does it start with the eye saccade? Does it start with you cutting your eye from one way to another? Or are there other preemptive stimuli that we might need to consider? So when we think about all 5 of the senses, we have to consider which one may hit first. Light, sound, which one is coming into individuals first. And that's the reason why we study eye saccades and sound as psychologists and motivational theorists as well. We also have a conversation whether can we drill down and say that there's one factor, one determinant to what led to your motivated behavior, or is it going to be a kind of smattering of things that happen, a perfect storm, if you will, that led to you being so motivated? And that's a good one to discuss as we have the Olympics coming up. They always try to give this, hey, this one event has led you all the way to this point. And oftentimes, if you live long enough, you understand that you usually have multiple things that have led people to this point, expressing their motivated behavior of running a 100, 200, 400, etc. Motivation in its current state is very fascinating with persistence over time. As I said before, when you're really focusing on individuals with a little difference, you just want to see how I can get people moving. How do I get people moving very quickly? However, when we start getting further into more cognitive and social cognitive and humanistic understandings of motivation, even learn, we start trying to figure out, okay, how are people who do things for 18 years, 14 years, how are they able to maintain and keep going back and trying to excel or trying to accomplish that goal? Like I said, with the Olympians, how can someone be 25 years old as a gymnast, and you've been doing gymnastics for the last 15 years, 20 years? You've been doing it since you were 5 years old. How do you stay motivated over that long period of time? Oh, you have a sports career. And not only did you have to work all those years to get to the professional sports, but even as a professional sport athlete, you still were in it for 15, 20 years. How did you, ma'am, sir, how did you maintain, that level of motivation to go out and perform at the highest level for so long? That's one of the most fascinating things to motivational theorists, and something that will always be studied because motivation was really early in its earliest form, really fascinated, not just motivation, but psychology with experts and people who do things very, very well. And that's sometimes where we fall short in motivation theory, where we're looking at people who perform at the highest level first. Next on, we still have a conversation of motive systems. We don't look at your motivation in one avenue or one space or in one setting, and those behaviors as being kind of static. So you oftentimes have these kind of motive systems that are also interacting within your own cognition and your own social cognition, especially. So I'll give a good example of motive systems. There's a motive system for academic learning in the classroom, but there's also a motive system for socializing and relatedness in the classroom. And those two systems are going to touch. They're going to engage. And if they do not engage, you're being really blind to them engaging. So sometimes you'll have to understand in the classroom that the socializing is a system that is can sometimes trump the learning and academic, because for students sometimes the socializing is what I see as most important and paramount right now. Okay. And last but certainly not least, there's still this conversation of cognition versus biology, and this really stems from the power of both. So as we were talking, I'm pretty sure it came to your mind like, okay, which one is more powerful? These biological DNA genetic drives that are pulling me to go drink water and eat food. But I've skipped a meal or two. I've gone a little while without a drink when I really kind of locked in and got into a certain flow or zone. Which one is really going to reign supreme over the other? And there's a lot of conversations on both sides. I will argue sometimes that you're not going to run away from biological drives too long because your body has those certain limitations. However, the brain and how it interprets and labels and understands events is a very powerful tool. A powerful tool where anybody who's accomplished at a very high level will talk about, I didn't think about doing these things that some people think of as biological because I was so locked in. So, an individual who may be writing a term paper at the last minute, of course, they sometimes will find a way to I'm so zoned in on this term paper cognitively, I forgot that I need to eat. I forgot I need to go to the restroom. I forgot I need to sleep. And these are some of the kind of conversations that we're continually having in motivation, because we understand that biology is so powerful that you just got to do it. But once you also get in your brain to do it, it's very powerful as well. Okay. And that's really the study of motivation as a field in a general sense, and some of the kind of foundational knowledge of biological and learned and cognitive components. This is how we understand motivation in this really simplest sense, and I'm really trying to give you a background of where we come from when we talk about human motivation. When you start seeing me go over more theories and more concepts in motivation, you'll start to understand how most of them will have to go through this kind of biological, learned, cognitive, and social cognitive conversation, depending on when they were presented, to understand and undergird what they're saying. So there's not going to be many motivational theories that just completely eliminate biological components. There's not going to be a motivation theory that's going to completely, divert from learned components or cognitive components at this point. So hope you all enjoyed this rendition, this lecture this time about the study of motivation, the study of human motivation and its components. I look forward to giving you guys some more. I'll try to make sure I keep it relatively short, but we're building something here. I have something I'm looking forward to giving you guys soon as it relates to my research on Black boys and Black men and motivation. But we got to build you up to that place. We have to get you to that place before I give that to you. That would have been too deep for the intro. So yeah, I'm a little over an hour in. I look forward to talking to you guys more. Look out for our next live stream in the coming days. And with that, peace.